Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Hello, Warbirders. Welcome to the second in this series that I'm calling Hawker's Stormbirds, because they're all named after weather phenomena. Let's just appreciate for a moment the awesomeness of the naming of this series of Hawker aircraft. Firstly, there was the beautiful alliteration of the Hawker Hurricane. But then, continuing to name the aircraft after storms just lends this feeling of swirling wind and furious power to all of them. Typhoon, Tempest, and Tornado. Never heard of the Hawker Tornado? Well, just wait. Well, back in 1937, just as production was starting on the Hurricane, Sidney Camm had already began working on the replacement for it. The Hurricane was always going to be a transition aircraft. A kind of hybrid between the older, fabric-covered, steel tube-type construction of the biplanes from the World War I and interwar eras, and the new all-metal birds of World War II. In fact, Camm was so quick on the draw for the new fighter that he was told by the Air Ministry to hold his horses and wait for the actual Air Ministry specification to be released. In July of 1938, the Air Ministry did issue Specification F-1837 that was seeking a heavily armed interceptor armed with 12 303 machine guns and capable of at least 400 miles per hour. The new interceptor was to be powered by either the Napier Sabre or Rolls-Royce Vulture, two newly developed super engines that were to produce 2,000 horsepower. Hawker then decided to create two aircraft, one based on each type of engine. The Rolls-Royce Vulture powered machine was to be called the Tornado, and the Napier Sabre version was to be called the Typhoon. Now don't get mixed up with the American XP-68 Tornado that we looked at in the Doomed Fledgling series, which was a variant of the Vultee XP-54 Swoosh Goose, except that it was to be powered by an engine which was also called a Tornado. The Wright R2160 Tornado, which was a 42-cylinder radial engine. But that engine was cancelled, and so was the XP-68. If you haven't seen that vid, it's worth a look. But back at Hawker, the company decided to cover its bases by making one model of the new fighter for each engine. The N variant would have the Napier engine, while the R one would have the Rolls-Royce. If you enjoy this video, please do your part, become a member of the channel, or drop me a super thanks. If you can't do either of those, then please just like and subscribe and hit the bell. It's really appreciated. The very first Hawker Tornado prototype, serial number P5219, really looks what it was, an updated Hurricane. It has a similar shape to the Hurry, except that instead of fabric and tubes in the back, this bird is almost all metal, except for a fabric-covered rudder fin. The wing was very similar to the Typhoon, thick with a slight anhedral at the root and then sweeping slightly upwards with a 5.5-degree dihedral. The wing was made to support the 6 303 machine guns each, with forward thinking to have space to put cannon in there too. It also was made very strong with plans for it to be able to carry some serious armament. Just like the Typhoon, the wing also contained the fuel, organized into a 40-gallon main tank outside of the main gear bay, and there was a nose tank in the leading edge of the wing that contained 37 gallons. Where you really see differences is the nose and belly. The Rolls-Royce Vulture had its cylinders arranged in an X configuration. If you can't recall the various cylinder arrangements, feel free to go back and look at my Cylinders Quest for Power series. With the X configuration, the exhaust gases were routed out through twin lines of exhaust stubs. It's really noticeable when we're so used to seeing that single row of stubs with so many aircraft of the age. Engine and oil cooling occurred in a prominent belly scoop between the main gear, just like the P-51. Somewhere under there was also the engine's carburetor intake, and the engine turned a 14-foot, 3-blade, constant-speed Rotal propeller. The cockpit also had the car door opening for the pilot, and also the poor rearward vision of its sister Typhoon, due to the faired rear behind the pilot. The pilot visibility must have been truly terrible, and it seems like the whole rear area would be a giant blind spot. Test pilot Philip Lucas took P-5219 up on her maiden flight on the 6th of October 1939, which was about 4 months before the Typhoon's maiden hop. There were problems, probably most telling with the engine. Keeping the Vulture cool was a problem, not only on the ground, but also in the air. While airborne, the airflow to the radiator scoop was disturbed by the leading edge of the wing, causing inadequate cooling in the radiator. The scoop would eventually be moved up to the nose under the engine, looking like the distinctive mouth of the Typhoon. Another problem that could not be solved by moving things around on the airframe was metal bits in the oil. As an airplane owner, I can tell you this is bad news. And it was a bad omen about a problem deep inside the Rolls-Royce Vulture. Liking what you're seeing? Why not click super thanks? In November 1939, just a month after the prototype flight, an order for 1,000 Tornadoes was placed. Well, this looked promising. 1 month after that, in December 1939, test pilot Lucas took her up again, and this time reported poor directional stability due to the radiator scoop being moved. Fixes were to lengthen the exit of the radiator by 3 inches, and the vertical stabilizer and rudder were enlarged. Later, tail wheel doors were added. Another problem was that the engine wasn't delivering the expected performance, and the prototype was sent to Rolls-Royce flight testing facility to see what was the matter. They tinkered with it, and the engine rewarded them by failing during a flight in July 1940, and the prototype was damaged in the subsequent forced landing. But luckily there was another. Prototype P-5224 had been started later, and so already had the radiator in the chin and the enlarged tail. This aircraft also had the carburetor intake on top of the engine cowling. Side windows had been installed behind the cockpit in an attempt to improve the pilot's vision. But engine cooling and excessive vibration with the Vulture engine were still problems. Remember that order for 1,000 Tornadoes? Somewhere along the way, it was changed to 800 Typhoons and only 200 Tornadoes. The fortunes of the two aircraft were shifting towards the Tiffy and away from the Tornado. But flight testing continued. The second prototype's engine failed in March 1941, and in June some decisions had to be made. Rolls-Royce was ordered to focus on its Merlin, and work on the Vulture was at first paused and then cancelled in October. The contracts for the 200 Tornadoes were also cancelled, and the Hawker aircraft that would rampage across Europe, raining down fire and rockets and bombs as Allied armies retook the continent, would be the Sabre-equipped Typhoon. The Tornado was dead. Or was it? The prototypes and the one production model continued being used for flight testing until they were all scrapped by late 1944. So that must be the end of the story of the Tornado. Not quite. Back in 1940, when both the Vulture and Napier engines were being problem children, there was talk of using either the Bristol Centaurus or even a Wright R3350 engine in the fighter instead. The plan for using the R3350 was dropped, but the thinking on the Centaurus continued, and because of this, there would be one last Tornado. Tornado serial number HG641 was a bit of a Frankenplane, being built of leftover bits from uncompleted Tornado production airframes bolted onto a new center fuselage. Mounted in the nose was the Centaurus engine, which was an air-cooled 18-cylinder, 2-row sleeve valve radial that produced over 2,000 horsepower. Also, as it was air-cooled, it saved about 350 pounds on radiator and cooling fluid and all that. This Centaurus Tornado wouldn't see any combat, but provided yeoman service in testing the Centaurus engine, different props, and even counter-rotating propellers. Although this experimental aircraft was also scrapped in August 1944, its DNA would continue on in the Centaurus-powered Tempest, which will be an episode for another day. If you enjoyed this video, please do your part and become a member of the channel or drop me a super thanks. If you can't do either of those, then please just like and subscribe and hit the bell. It's really appreciated. Until next time.